Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining me. Welcome to this session on Robert's Rules of Order for Senators. For those of you that maybe don't remember me, my name is Polly Mees. I'm the Assistant Director of Governmental Affairs here at Associated Students. Previously, I held the position as the Legislative Liaison, where I conducted Robert's Rules of Order trainings, and so that's what we're here to facilitate today. And so first I want to go over an introduction to what is parliamentary procedure. If at any point you have any questions, please feel free to use the raise hand function and I'll call on you. Or if there's a gap in the presentation, feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in. No worries at all. Robert's Rules of Order is a type of parliamentary procedure, and it is designed to allow business to be handled in an organized and logical fashion. It's to allow for majority rule, and they say that it's a manner for the use of supermajorities, so that would be like a 2/3 vote. It also allows for the rights of the minority to be protected. In the case of like 50% plus one, for example, it allows for like every position, every person on committees to have a vote. It also allows for a formal sense of order, right? So we know who's able to speak. We don't risk interrupting somebody or cutting them off, things like that. And then it also provides the terms for legislative and parliamentary actions, like calling to question, for example, which we will cover as we go along in the session. Okay, so what I'm first going to cover with you all here is the standard procedure in this large circle here in the middle, and this is going to cover some of the terms that you probably already know in the Senate sessions that we've done already. So this is going to go from open floor to a motion passing. And then you can see already on this presentation, there's some other circles off in the periphery where we're going to talk about amendments, objections, and points. And so we'll cover that, but I wanted to start off with this foundation of what we call the standard procedure. And so like I mentioned, it's going to start off with an open floor. So this could look like your chair saying the floor is now open, or if it's not explicitly stated, right after a motion passes, the floor is then open. So that's where you're going to start. That is your basis for being able to make a motion, is an open floor. And then next is the motion. So you would say, I motion to pass this resolution. I motion to pass this funding request. So all motions are going to start with that phrase there in the beginning, and then it's going to follow with the action you would like the committee to take. In this example, it was passing the resolution, passing the funding request, etc. Then next, all motions are going to require a second. So your chair will ask, is there a second? And you, as the person that wishes to second the motion, will then raise your hand. What this looks like literally in Zoom is the raise hand function. But when we conduct Senate sessions in person, that also looks like a literal raised hand. And so a second is someone who wishes to hear more on the issue at hand as it's defined. So that would mean that you are wanting to move the motion further along in the standard procedure. So that could look like you're wanting to take a vote, you're wanting to quash the motion, something like that. But as a second, you don't necessarily have to agree with the motion on the table, and you don't necessarily have to vote any particular way. It's just that you're wanting to see the motion move to the next step. And so as the second, you won't say anything necessarily. So your chair will ask, is there a second? And then they will call on you and say, seconded by Senator and your name. And so you'll know that you've seconded the motion that way. And then next, you're going to go into discussion on the motion. So your chair will say, seconded by Senator Mays, for example, if it were me, we are now in discussion. And so this is the portion of the motion in which you could discuss literally anything. So that might mean discussing the merits of the resolution. Should we pass? Should we not? Different points to consider. But this portion of it is that you are in discussion on whether or not you should pass the motion. And sometimes there is discussion and sometimes there's not. When you as a committee would like the discussion to end, you will then call to question. So it could be call to question or I call the question. That is essentially you are saying, I would like the question to be called, meaning I would like the question of I motion to pass this resolution. You would like the committee to take a vote on the motion at hand. So this ends the discussion on the motion, it ends the discussion on the amendments if there are any, and it brings the motion to consideration of consent is what it's called. And so you will call to question, and then your chair will say, a question has been called. Is there an objection to call the question? And so we'll cover this further in objections, but if there are no objections to call to question and there are no objections to consent, then if your vote is consent, you will say consent. And that is what this slide represents here is your vote. It could be consent, it could be object. Like I said, we'll cover the nuances of that objection when we cover objections, but if there are no objections, then your chair will say a question has been called. Is there an objection to call the question? There is consent, and then the motion passes. Sorry, this Prezi is a little wonky. Okay, so I'm going to pause there really quick. Does anybody have any questions about the standard procedure before we move on to any of the other pieces? Surya?
So, like, for all AS committees, are, like, we required to follow Robert's Rules of Orders, or can we go by some informal procedure, or how does that work?
Yes, so all committees are required to use Robert's Rules of Order per legal code, but the caveat there is that your chair is going to interpret Robert's Rules of Order. So that could mean that they choose to implement specific elements of Robert's Rules of Order. They can determine like other types of things. And so a lot of our committees do choose to use a more like informal form of Robert's Rules of Order. And the chair of the Senate typically chooses to have a little bit more structure to the sessions, but yes, our committees all do use Robert's Rules of Order. It just depends on the interpretation of the chair, what degree it's used and implemented. Okay. Are there any other questions about the standard procedure before I move on to some of the other topics here? Okay. So I wanted to cover this bubble here on the right about having no second. And so, like I mentioned before, all motions do require a second. And so I wanted to cover here what happens if there's no second. And so, as indicated here, the motion then dies, and then you go back into open floor. So if we're looking at this standard procedure bubble here, you start with open floor, a motion is made. If there is no second, then you move back to this very first square here of open floor, because you need a second on each motion in order to move the motion to the next step. Okay, so next I want to cover objections. So let's start with objection to consent. And so I want to clarify here, actually let me move this slideshow out just a little bit more. Sorry that this goes back and forth, that's just how Prezis are sometimes. So There are two different objections that we're going to cover today, which is objection to call to question and objection to consent. So an objection to consent is essentially your no vote, right? So the chair is asking, a question has been called. Is there an objection to call the question? That is one type of objection. And then if you then answer object, you're going to want to be careful about at which point you object depending on the purpose and the goal, right? So if your intention is to vote no, and you say objection at that point, your chair will ask you, do you object to call the question or do you object to consent? And so, for example, if we're taking a vote on a funding request, if we're taking a vote on a resolution, and you want to vote no, you don't think the resolution should pass, you don't think the funding request should pass, that would be an objection to consent. That's your no vote. So we're going to start there. So with an objection to consent, what is then going to happen is a hand vote, right? So this happens particularly for record keeping purposes. And also, to be clear, if the voting threshold has been met in order for a motion to pass, right? So depending on the motion, right, some resolutions, for example, require a 2/3 vote of the Senate in order to pass. Some require 50% plus one. There are some motions, like going into recess, for example, that require 50% plus one. And so this hand vote is designed to determine if that threshold has been met. And so a hand vote is going to take place, and that is kind of the votes that you've already seen with the Google spreadsheet that happened in our first couple of sessions. And that was simply recording everybody's vote, counting the amount of yes votes, the amount of no votes, and the amount of abstentions. And so that's what's going to happen if there's an objection to consent. So if somebody is wanting to vote no on a particular motion, then you're going to go into a hand vote. There are a couple of votes here that I want to cover that are not necessarily related to objection to consent, but they're kind of contained in this portion of the presentation. And so I'll cover those now while we're here. And that is a vote by roll call and a vote by secret ballot. So when you make a motion, or if you're calling something to question, you can specify that you would like a vote to be taken by roll call or a vote to be taken by secret ballot. And so I kind of want to cover a little bit of what those two are. So a vote by roll call is where your chair will call out each of your names and you will vocalize your vote. And in the minutes, your name and your vote will be recorded right next to each other. And so that is what a vote by roll call looks like. And then a vote by secret ballot, which we haven't had to do a vote by secret ballot remotely yet, but a vote by secret ballot when we were in person looks like that everyone is handed a blank sheet of paper. Your vote is written on that sheet of paper without any other identifying information. It's put into a box, and whichever staff is there. The last time that I had experience with a secret ballot vote, it was Marisol and I that were present during that session. And so between her, I, and the chair, we collected all of the slips, we collected the box, and then the three of us each counted the votes. And so in that instance, your name would not be associated with your vote. It's done by secret, as the name indicates. And so just to circle back, as a reminder, an objection to consent is a no vote. And so then let's go to an objection to call to question. So like I mentioned, when your chair says a question has been called, is there an objection to call to question? There are two different opportunities here. If there's an objection to call to question, then that is you saying essentially that I don't want a vote to be taken. So you're objecting to the question being called, if you will. And so what is then going to happen in this conglomerate of arrows here, I'll walk you through it, is the chair is going to ask you, do you withdraw your call to question to the person that called the question, right? So if I, as a senator, said, I called the question, somebody objects to it, the chair is going to ask me, do you withdraw your call to question? And so I can say yes or no, which is indicated by the green arrow going to the right and the red arrow going to the left. And so the green arrow going to the right indicates that I did withdraw my call to question, and we're going back into discussion on the motion, right? So I agree, we don't need to take a vote right now. I'm going to withdraw, and we're going to be back in discussion. If I say, no, I don't withdraw my call to question, I do want a vote to be taken, then we're going to go into a vote to vote. And that means that the committee, if you will, is at an impasse, right? So there are some folks that would like to take a vote, and there are some folks that don't want to vote. And so that is what a vote to vote is, essentially, is we're determining as a group collectively, is there consensus? Should we go into a vote? Should we not go into a vote? And so the additional set of arrows here, the green arrow going down sort of to the left, and then the red arrow going straight across. If the vote to vote passes, as you can see kind of in this square here, then you're going to go into a hand vote, right? So the vote to vote passes, the committee has consensus, we're going to take a vote, then you're going to go into a hand vote, which it works exactly the same way that I talked about before. The chair is going to go around and say, if you choose to vote yes, please raise your hand. If you choose to vote no, then raise your hand. And so that's what a hand vote is going to look like after a vote to vote. And then if the vote to vote fails, then as a committee, you have consensus again that you don't want to take a vote. And so you're going to go back into discussion on the motion. So just to recap, when your chair says, is there an objection to call to question? You have two different opportunities here for objection if you wish. You can object to call the question, which indicates I would not like this motion to continue to a vote. Or if you have an objection to consent, meaning you would like to vote no, then those are the two different types of objections that you can utilize after that moment in the standard procedure. So I'm going to pause here again and see, are there any questions about objections before I move on to amendments and points? Okay, sounds good. So next, let's talk about amendments. So amendments are used if you would like to amend, change a motion. So that could mean if you have a funding request, for example, that's on the table, and I motion to approve that funding request, and you as another senator want to decrease or increase, or maybe I said the name wrong, or something that needs to be changed in some fashion. That is where an amendment would come in handy. And so you would then motion to amend the motion to, and then include whatever change language you want. So it could be, I motion to amend the motion to, there's a lot of motion toing happening here. And then you would include the new language. And so what's going to happen then is your chair is going to ask, is the amendment friendly with the first? And so we're going to have a couple of different paths that this can take here as well, the same with objections. And so if the amendment is friendly with the first, then we're going to shift to the right here. So you can see where it says friendly here. If it is friendly with the first, then the amendment becomes the new motion. And then you're going to be in discussion on the new motion the same way that you are in discussion on any other motion. So that end of it is pretty simple. If it is friendly with the first, then the amendment becomes adopted, and then you get to kind of move along through the standard procedure the way that you normally would. If it's unfriendly with the first, this is where we have a couple more steps. And so we'll walk through that right now. If the amendment is not friendly with the first, then your chair is going to ask, is there a second for the amendment? And similar to traditional motions, if you will, amendments also need a second to continue. So if there's no second, the amendment dies and you're back in discussion on the original motion. And that's kind of indicated here on this left-hand side. Is there a second? No second, the amendment dies, we go back into discussion. If the motion is unfriendly with the first and there is a second, then you're going to go into discussion on the amendment and take a vote on it, the same way that you would on any other motion. And so once a vote is taken, if the vote on the amendment passes, then it's going to become the new motion. If the vote on the amendment fails, then you're going to go back into discussion on the original motion. So again, just to recap a little bit here, if you would like to amend a motion, your chair is then going to ask, is the amendment friendly with the first? If it's friendly, it's going to become adopted. If it's unfriendly, you're going to need to get a second and potentially a vote on the amendment before it can become adopted. And this is intended as a way to kind of respect the intention of the person that made the motion and to have consensus on whether or not the amendment should be adopted and if everybody kind of agrees on that. So I'm going to pause there again. And are there any questions about amendments before I move on to points? No? Okay. Okay. So there are 4 different points here that I want to cover, and that is the point of information, point of order, point of parliamentary procedure, and point of personal privilege. So a point of information is used for questions about the discussion at hand. So you can, it says here to stand and raise your hand. That doesn't always happen, even in person, and it would be a little more difficult to do remotely. But you can use the raise hand function on Zoom, and when we were in person, senators would just raise their hand to get the chair's attention for this point of information. A point of order is used to notify the chair of a violation of our legal code or parliamentary procedure. So if, for example, the motion was voted on without getting a second, that would be notifying of a violation of parliamentary procedure. And I'm going to talk about how this point of order and how the point of parliamentary procedure are different. But so like if a rule, if you will, is broken, right? Or if there's a motion to amend the Constitution, for example, and if you were at our session a couple of days ago on Monday about writing legislation, you'll remember that we talked about, you know, amending the Constitution requires a resolution and then a vote of the student body, but say, you know, there is a motion to amend it or something kind of left field, that would be something that a point of order could be used for. And I know these are really out there examples, but as you become more comfortable with the procedures and kind of working through them, these points that you can use are going to become a little bit more evident. And it's also okay if you don't get it right the first time. That's what your chair and your advisors are there to help with. So it's all good. And so a point of parliamentary procedure is different from a point of order in that a point of parliamentary procedure is used to clarify the procedure, right? So if it's, you know, how a hand vote is taken or how a vote to vote is taken, that would be something that you could clarify using a point of parliamentary procedure. And then a point of personal privilege is used to notify the chair that you are uncomfortable during the meeting. We have noted here this could be temperature, right, when we were in the flying A room. It would often get very hot or very cold, depending on the time of the year. So a point of personal privilege would be perfect for trying to, get the AC turned down or off, or opening a door or something like that. It can also be used for language. You will have agreements that you've made for like speaking agreements and also for conduct. And so a point of personal privilege could be used to discuss that. And it could also be used to provide a quick like fact correction to another speaker's statement. So if somebody were to say something that is incorrect and you would like to clarify or point that out, a point of personal privilege would be perfect for that scenario. Okay. So that is the standard procedure, objections, amendments, and points. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share right now because I want to share with you all another guide because I love them. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm going to go through my drive right now and try to find this guide. I made a like reference guide that has like different points on the left-hand side. If you were wanting to like introduce a motion, all sorts of things. Let me actually share my screen again so you can see it, and I'll go ahead and email this. Okay, so this was the guide that I was referring to. I think this is all going to fit in one page here. And so on this left-hand side here, we've got the action, right? So introducing a motion, amending a motion, sending business to a committee. We also have entering a closed session, recess the meeting, etc. All these different actions here that you could take. And then we also have a what to say here in the next column over. So for introducing a motion, we've already covered kind of what that looks like, right? A motion to, and then you finish the sentence. And then if we have like going into a closed session, right, there's a motion to enter into a closed session to discuss, in brackets there, predetermined topic. And then we also have these columns here about do you need recognition from the chair in order to say that action, right? So voting on a motion, you don't need recognition from the chair to say consent or object the same way that you would if you were making a motion. And then, right, this like point of information, you don't need recognition from the chair. There's also this column here about can it be debated? Right, so you're not going to debate on somebody's vote, but if there is a call to question and you would like to object to the call to question, that can be debated in the sense of you can object to call to question. There's also this column here about can it be amended, and then the votes that you are going to need. So for most motions, you're going to need a majority. If there's considering something outside of its scheduled order, so motion to suspend the orders of the day and move to a different place on the agenda, that's going to require a 2/3 vote. Extending a speaker's allotted time, that's going to require a 2/3. So we've got all of this kind of contained in here for you. And so I'll share that this guide with you in an email to kind of accompany this session, if you will. Are there any other questions? Second, but I'm really glad that this was helpful for you all to kind of break down the different pieces of it. And like I said, I'll pass along for sure the presentation and this guide, and then whenever the recording becomes live, if you want to come back and revisit it, you're more than welcome to. But thank you so much for joining. I hope that you all have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you for the next sessions that you've registered for.
Awesome. Thank you.